Hello. Settle in comfortably, wrap yourself up warmly, and let the gentle whisper of stories carry you into a deep, peaceful sleep. Imagine the biting chill of a medieval winter, the kind that seeps into your bones, even within the thick embrace of a castle keep. Dawn breaks, not with the warmth of the sun, but with a pale, grudging light pushing through narrow, unglazed loopholes. This is the reality for royalty in centuries past, particularly between the 11th and 14th centuries, before the advent of advanced heating technologies. The king's bedchamber, often located on an upper floor for strategic defense, was far from the insulated havens we know today. Historians and archaeological digs confirm that castle construction prior to the High Middle Ages prioritized defensive capabilities over thermal comfort. Walls, often 10 to 15 feet thick, were formidable barriers against invaders, but equally effective at radiating internal heat outwards. A typical bedchamber might measure 15 by 20 feet, with minimal natural light. Expert analysis of castle architecture, such as that at the Tower of London or Chateau Gaillard in Normandy, reveals a consistent lack of dedicated heating infrastructure beyond the rudimentary fireplace. These fireplaces, often shallow and lacking efficient flue systems, produced more smoke than sustained heat, frequently leaving the chamber filled with a choking haze, as chronicled in contemporary monastic records noting a pervasive stench of wood smoke. The king, and indeed much of his court, embraced a complex multi-layered strategy against the cold. The bed itself became a fortress of warmth. A common practice involved sleeping on a carved wooden frame, often draped with heavy brocades and furs. A mattress, typically stuffed with straw, wool, or feathers, the latter a luxury reserved for the elite, provided the initial insulation. Over this, several layers of woolen blankets and fur pelts, particularly ermine or sable for the monarch, were meticulously arranged. Dr. Mary Elizabeth Scott, a medieval textiles expert, highlights that the sheer volume of textiles used was staggering, sometimes equating to the weight of a small human, creating a microclimate within the bed. This elaborate bedding system wasn't merely for comfort, it was a matter of survival. The average internal temperature of a stone castle during a harsh winter could easily drop to near freezing overnight, even with a dying fire. The king's rising, therefore, was not a swift affair. To emerge from that cocoon of warmth into the frigid air of the chamber required fortitude and preparation, underscoring the stark environmental challenges faced by rulers in an age devoid of modern heating. This intimate struggle against nature is crucial to understanding the daily lives and priorities of medieval monarchs. The first light of dawn, grey and thin, did little to dispel the profound chill clinging to the king's bedchamber. Emerging from the carefully constructed warmth of his bed, a monarch in, say, 13th century England or France, faced an immediate challenge: the air itself. Studies indicate that indoor temperatures in castle keeps during winter months, especially in the early morning, often mirrored or were only a few degrees warmer than the exterior, ranging from 35 degrees to 45 degrees, 1.7 to 7.2 degrees. This environmental reality dictated a specific and often elaborate morning ritual. The initial task fell to the king's chamberlains or personal attendants. Records from the household accounts of Edward III, for instance, detail specific provisions for kindling and fuel for the royal chambers. Upon rising, servants would immediately set about rekindling the embers in the bedchamber fireplace or lighting a new fire if the previous one had completely died out. This was not a quick process. Medieval firewood, often damp and inefficient, took time to catch and generate significant heat. Expert historical reconstructions at sites like Warwick Castle demonstrate that even with experienced hands, it could take 30 minutes or more to establish a substantial blaze capable of making a tangible difference to the room's temperature. Simultaneously, the king would be presented with his dressing gown and slippers, typically made of heavy wool or fur-lined leather. This immediate layering was critical to mitigating the shock of the cold air. The act of washing was also fundamentally different. Rather than a full bath, which was a time-consuming and logistically challenging endeavor in winter, requiring vast quantities of heated water carried by hand, the morning cleansing was often limited to a bowl of water, sometimes warmed, for hands and face. Chroniclers like Jean Froissart, recounting life in aristocratic households, mention the use of perfumed waters or rosewater, primarily to mask body odors, rather than for thorough cleaning. Beyond personal hygiene, the morning ritual included the presentation of the day's first garments. These were meticulously laid out, pre-warmed if possible. Clothing consisted of multiple layers: a linen chemise worn next to the skin, followed by woolen tunics, hose, and potentially a fur-lined surcoat, depending on the day's activities and the castle's internal climate. The emphasis was always on insulation and trapping body heat. This complex layering, from the undergarments to the outer robes, was a functional necessity, a daily defense against the penetrating cold that defined medieval castle life. This detailed preparation highlights how the absence of central heating systems fundamentally shaped the most intimate aspects of a monarch's day, turning a simple morning routine into a concerted effort to survive and function in a challenging environment. Beyond the immediate confines of the king's bedchamber, the struggle against winter's grip extended to every habitable space within the castle. While we touched upon the personal fire, the larger castle presented a far more complex thermal engineering challenge. The primary source of heat for common areas, and indeed most individual rooms, was the open hearth, a feature omnipresent in medieval castle architecture from the Norman conquest onwards. Archaeological excavations at sites like Dover Castle and Château de Chinon confirm the prevalence of large, recessed fireplaces in great halls, private chambers, and even guardrooms. These fireplaces, often massive in scale, were designed to consume large quantities of wood. For example, the Great Hall at Pembroke Castle features a fireplace opening over 10 feet wide. However, their efficiency was notoriously low. Dr. Alistair Grant, a leading architectural historian specializing in medieval structures, points out that early fireplaces, essentially a hole in the wall with a rudimentary flue, expelled up to 80% of their heat straight out through the chimney, along with a significant portion of the room's heated air. This created a constant pull of cold air into the room to replace the escaped warmth, leading to pervasive drafts. The fuel economy of these hearths was staggering. A single large fireplace in a great hall could consume several cords of wood per day during sustained cold periods. Accounts from royal households, such as those of Henry III in the mid-13th century, meticulously detail expenditures on thousands of bundles of firewood annually, demonstrating the critical logistical challenges of maintaining warmth. Forests surrounding castles were often managed specifically for fuel wood, leading to extensive deforestation in areas with high castle densities. Despite the vast quantities of fuel and the sheer size of the fireplaces, the radiating heat primarily benefited only those in close proximity to the hearth. Imagine the scene in a great hall, a roaring fire at one end casting flickering light and some warmth, while just 20 or 30 feet away, The air remained frigid, condensation forming on the cold stone walls. The stone construction, while offering incredible defensive strength, was a poor insulator, efficiently conducting heat away from interior spaces. Techniques for improving fireplace efficiency, such as the development of more complex mantelpieces and narrower flues to create better updrafts, only began to appear more regularly in the late 14th and 15th centuries, long after many of the great keeps had been constructed. This constant battle for thermal comfort shaped daily routines, social gatherings, and even the design evolution of these formidable structures. As the morning advanced, the castle's inhabitants converged upon the Great Hall, a central communal space and the administrative heart of the medieval fortress. Here, the challenge of maintaining warmth was amplified by sheer volume and the constant ingress and egress of people. Data from architectural assessments of castles like Conwy or Caernarfon in Wales indicate that great halls could often exceed 60 feet in length and 30 feet in width, with ceilings soaring 20 to 30 feet high. Heating such cavernous spaces with open hearths was an exercise in compromise. Despite the imposing fire, a constant battle against the cold permeated the hall. Drafts were an enduring problem. Uncovered window openings, though often narrow and high-set purely for defensive purposes, allowed cold air to funnel in. Even when wooden shutters or oiled cloth were used to cover these apertures, they offered minimal insulation. The very construction materials, hewn stone and rough-cut timber, acted as thermal sinks, absorbing any generated heat and radiating cold. Dr. Eleanor Ferris, a medieval living historian, states, "The Great Hall was never truly warm by modern standards. It hovered above freezing, perhaps reaching 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 13 degrees Celsius, in the direct vicinity of the hearth, but quickly dropped off as you moved away." Activities within the Great Hall were therefore adapted to these thermal realities. Dining, once a grand affair with numerous courses, was often conducted with attendees wrapped in cloaks and furs. The warmth from shared presence, body heat from dozens of individuals, and the steam from large communal meals played a psychological role as much as a physical one. Long tables would be set up, often with benches, encouraging people to huddle together. Scented herbs and rushes on the floor could help mask the damp and cold air, though their thermal effect was negligible. Beyond dining, justice was dispensed, proclamations made, and entertainment provided in this multifunctional space. All these activities occurred under the pall of wood smoke, a pervasive element of castle life. Despite advancements in chimney design by the High Middle Ages, which funneled most smoke upwards, some inevitably lingered, especially in large draughty halls. Chroniclers sometimes complained of smoke-filled chambers causing irritation to the eyes and lungs, a testament to the daily reality. The Great Hall, therefore, functioned not as a comfortably heated room, but as a site where collective activity and the strategic use of clothing, fire, and human proximity helped buffer against the unrelenting cold, shaping the very social dynamics and etiquette of medieval court life. While the architectural limitations of medieval castles presented an undeniable thermal challenge, the ingenuity of daily life often found supplementary ways to combat the cold. One of the most effective, and certainly most celebrated, methods was through the strategic preparation and consumption of food and drink. Culinary practices in winter evolved to become an integral part of the castle's warmth strategy, transforming meals into both nourishment and thermal comfort. The medieval diet, especially for the high-status inhabitants of a castle, was rich in calorie-dense foods, particularly during winter. Meats like beef, venison, and pork, often roasted over open fires or slow-cooked in large cauldrons, provided sustained internal warmth. Fat was a crucial component, offering a high energy yield. Contemporary cookbooks, such as the Forme of Curie, c. 1390, or the Ménagier de Paris, c. 1393, feature numerous recipes for substantial stews, potages, and meat pies, all designed to be hearty and warming. These dishes required long cooking times, meaning the kitchen, often a separate building or a heavily ventilated area within the castle, was a constant source of ambient heat. Beyond the energy from food, the very act of consuming a hot meal, particularly those served directly from the hearth, offered immediate sensory warmth. Imagine steaming trenchers of slow-cooked venison stew, spiced with ingredients like ginger, cloves, and cinnamon, not just for flavor, but for their perceived warming properties. According to medieval humoral theory, Dr. Juliana Light, a historian of medieval foodways, emphasizes that the medieval understanding of health and temperature deeply influenced diet. Hot spices and rich meats were explicitly recommended to combat the cold and wet humours of winter. Equally important was the role of drink. Water, often cold from wells, was rarely consumed plain. Instead, ale and wine were staple beverages. Ale, brewed within the castle, offered calories and a slight alcoholic warmth, and was often consumed warm, particularly by labourers. Mulled wine, infused with spices and heated, was a common beverage for the nobility, served in the great hall and private chambers. The logistical effort involved in transporting and serving large quantities of hot food and drink to numerous individuals in various parts of the castle underscores its vital role in the overall thermal management strategy. These culinary comforts transformed meal times from mere sustenance into a central pillar of combating the pervasive cold. The shared experience around hot food and drink also fostered a sense of communal warmth and survival, making feasts a vital social and physiological defense against the harsh medieval winter. Beyond the immediate sensory comfort of hot food and drink, medieval diets were fundamentally structured to provide the sustained energy necessary for the human body to generate its own heat in persistently cold environments. Food was not merely sustenance, it was literally fuel for survival. The metabolic demands of living in a stone castle through winter without modern heating were significantly higher than today, requiring a diet optimized for calorie and fat intake. Records from various royal households across medieval Europe, from England's Plantagenets to France's Capetians, consistently show a remarkable consumption of meat. For example, household accounts from the court of Edward I, late 13th century, detailed daily allocations that included substantial portions of beef, mutton, and pork. A single person in a noble household might consume 2 to 3 pounds of meat per day, supplemented with large quantities of bread and ale. This is considerably higher than modern dietary recommendations, but was a practical necessity. The digestion of calorie-dense meals, particularly those rich in protein and fat, generates significant thermic effect, essentially producing internal warmth as the body processes the food. Historical nutritionists studying skeletal remains from medieval populations have noted evidence of robust physical activity and high caloric intake among the elite, reflecting a lifestyle that demanded substantial energy. This sustained energy release was vital for maintaining core body temperature. While today we might consider such a diet unhealthy, for medieval populations facing constant cold and physical exertion, it was an adaptive strategy. Fat, in particular, was prized not just for flavor, but for its high caloric density, providing twice the energy per gram compared to carbohydrates or protein. Sweat, lard, and butter were indispensable components of the winter kitchen. Moreover, the process of food preservation often resulted in high salt content in meats and fish, which, combined with the often starchy carbohydrate intake, required ample fluid consumption. This drove the demand for alcoholic beverages like ale and wine, which further contributed calories and, in moderation, a perceived internal warmth, though too much alcohol can actually lower core body temperature by dilating blood vessels. The careful planning and provisioning of such a diet, from large-scale hunting expeditions to the extensive storage of grains and preserved meats, underscores a deep understanding, albeit empirical, of food's role as the body's internal furnace. In the medieval castle, every meal was a strategic move in the ongoing battle against the relentless winter chill, transforming the taste of food into the taste of survival itself. While architectural design, limited heating, and calorific diets offered partial defenses against medieval winters, the most immediate and visible solution lay in strategically chosen clothing. Far from mere fashion, medieval garments, particularly for the upper classes, were engineered for insulation, an art perfected through centuries of living in unheated environments. The concept of layering was paramount, a practical response to the fluctuating temperatures within a castle. The foundation of any medieval ensemble, for both men and women, was the chemise or shirt, typically made of fine linen. Linen, while not a strong insulator, provided a breathable layer next to the skin, wicking away moisture and preventing direct contact with scratchy outer garments. Over this, several layers of wool were common. Wool, with its natural crimp, traps pockets of air, making it an excellent insulator even when damp. Expert analysis of medieval textile fragments and effigies, such as those at Westminster Abbey depicting monarchs like Eleanor of Castile, reveal intricate drapery indicative of multiple layers. For the king, this layering system was both functional and a powerful display of status. Beyond the basic tunic and hose, a king might wear a tunic of costly wool or silk, followed by a fur-lined cotardie, and finally, a heavy outer garment, such as a houppelande or mantle. These outer garments were often lined with expensive furs like ermine, sable, or miniver, squirrel fur, which offered superior insulation properties compared to cheaper options like sheepskin or rabbit. Royal wardrobe accounts, such as those from the reign of Edward II, early 14th century, meticulously list expenditures on vast quantities of these costly furs, signifying not just luxury, but a vital provision against the cold. The total effect was a complex thermal barrier around the body. Each layer trapped air, and the cumulative thickness provided significant protection against heat loss. Headwear, such as coifs or hoods, and warm footwear like leather boots often lined with wool or fur, were equally essential to prevent heat loss from extremities. A person dressed in such an array would carry their own microclimate. This elaborate and often restrictive method of dressing meant that fluidity of movement was often sacrificed for warmth, a daily trade-off in the cold stone halls. The garments themselves were therefore not just coverings, but carefully constructed personal heating systems reflecting both the practical needs and the social hierarchies of medieval life. The visible splendor of a monarch's attire thus served a dual purpose, asserting power and prestige, while simultaneously offering a vital shield against the pervasive cold of their stone domain. The choice of textiles in medieval garments was never arbitrary. It was a carefully calculated decision balancing cost, availability, and, crucially, thermal properties. While earlier segments highlighted the sheer volume of layers, this segment explores the specific materials and their inherent functional advantages in combating the pervasive castle chill. The fabrics chosen for the king's wardrobe represented the pinnacle of medieval textile technology and economic power. Wool, undoubtedly, was the king of medieval textiles for warmth. Its natural crimp and scaly exterior allowed it to trap significant amounts of air, creating an insulating barrier. Different grades of wool were used, from coarse, heavy broadcloth for outer layers to finer, softer varieties for inner garments, though still a far cry from modern merino wool. The king's woolen tunics and doublets would have been tightly woven and densely felted, further enhancing their insulating properties. Archaeological finds from medieval shipwrecks, such as the Mary Rose, have yielded wool fragments that, upon analysis, demonstrate the incredible density and resilience of these historical fabrics. Beyond wool, furs elevated the insulating power and also broadcast royal status. Sumptuary laws throughout the medieval period often dictated who could wear specific furs, making the king's ermine or sable not just warm, but a clear sign of his undisputed authority. Ermine, the Arctic stoat, with its dense, white winter coat, was reserved almost exclusively for royalty, providing a lightweight, yet incredibly warm lining for cloaks and robes. Sable, from the sub-Arctic regions of Russia, was even rarer and more luxurious, possessing an unparalleled softness and warmth. The lining of a single royal mantle could require hundreds of individual pelts, representing substantial wealth and extensive trade networks across continents. Dr. Isabella Blackwood, a sartorial historian, notes, "The weight and sheer expense of these fur-lined garments were astonishing. They were mobile microclimates, designed to be both magnificent and supremely functional as personal heating devices. Silk, while not as inherently warm as wool or fur, was often used for decorative elements or in combination with other materials. For instance, a silk outer layer might be backed with heavy wool or lined with fur. Velvets and brocades, often woven with silk and metallic threads, added density and thus some thermal mass, but their primary role was visual opulence. The skilled craftsmanship involved in weaving these dense fabrics, often in sophisticated patterns, added to their functionality by increasing their bulk and ability to trap air. Thus, every fibre, every stitch in the king's winter attire served a dual purpose: a declaration of power and a meticulously designed defense against the unforgiving cold, demonstrating that in the medieval castle, true wealth could indeed provide a tangible measure of warmth. Despite the elaborate measures to generate and retain warmth, medieval castles were inherently drafty and damp environments, particularly in winter. These physical characteristics were not merely discomforts. They represented significant health risks that the castle inhabitants, including the king, faced daily. The constant intrusion of cold air and moisture created conditions ripe for respiratory illnesses and exacerbated existing health conditions. Architectural surveys of castles from across the medieval period consistently reveal the limited and often poorly sealed openings designers were forced to contend with. Windows, unglazed for centuries, were simply apertures in thick stone walls. While wooden shutters could be closed, they were rarely airtight, leaving narrow gaps for wind and rain to penetrate. The reliance on tapestries and wall hangings, observed in sites like Stirling Castle or the private chambers at the Château de Saumur, was not solely for aesthetic appeal. These heavy cloths served a practical purpose: to reduce drafts, partially insulate the cold stone walls, and provide a modest barrier against the chilling air. However, their effectiveness was limited. The pervasive dampness within a castle was a silent but potent threat. Stone walls, especially those with minimal external rendering, were porous and absorbed moisture from the environment, leading to persistent internal humidity. Records from royal physicians and monastic chroniclers frequently mention agues, fevers, coughs, and rheums, catarrh or inflammation, during winter months. Medical historians now understand these to be various forms of respiratory infections, bronchitis, and the exacerbation of conditions like arthritis, directly linked to prolonged exposure to cold, damp conditions. Children and the elderly, as always, were particularly vulnerable. Furthermore, the very fires that provided warmth also contributed to health hazards. The smoke generated by burning wood, especially in inefficient fireplaces, would fill rooms, irritating airways and contributing to chronic respiratory problems. Carbon monoxide poisoning, while not understood at the time, would also have been a silent killer, particularly in more enclosed chambers with restricted ventilation. The historical record, through household accounts detailing medical provisions and the frequently shortened lifespans of even the wealthiest individuals, hints at the constant, unseen struggle against illness. The battle for warmth in a medieval castle was, therefore, not just about comfort, but intrinsically linked to the basic quest for health and survival, highlighting the stark reality that even for kings, life in winter was a perpetual negotiation with unseen environmental dangers. The consistent cold and damp conditions inside medieval castles during winter placed immense physiological stress on their inhabitants, turning the very act of existing into a body's battle against illness. While access to greater resources meant kings often had better food and medical care than commoners, they were by no means immune to the prevalent winter ailments. Scientific studies on thermoregulation demonstrate that prolonged exposure to temperatures below optimal comfort zones, even if not hypothermic, significantly compromises the immune system. The body expends considerable energy merely trying to maintain its core temperature of 98.6 Gleichstieg 37 degrees Celsius. This constant energy drain leaves fewer resources for fighting off pathogens. Medieval medical texts and chronicles, while not using modern terminology, frequently describe heightened rates of sickness during the colder months. For example, royal itineraries often show reduced travel during winter, due not only to impassable roads, but also to the increased susceptibility to illness among the court. Among the specific afflictions, respiratory diseases were rampant. The combination of cold, damp air, indoor smoke from inefficient fireplaces, and close living quarters, fostering easy transmission, created a perfect breeding ground for colds, influenza-like illnesses, and more severe infections such as pneumonia. Indeed, many medieval monarchs' deaths were attributed to winter sicknesses or fluxes of the chest. For instance, chroniclers report that King John of England suffered from dysentery and fever in the autumn of 1216, exacerbated by cold and damp conditions, leading to his death. Beyond acute infections, the cold and damp profoundly affected chronic conditions. Rheumatism and various forms of arthritis, which are exacerbated by cold and damp, would have been debilitating for many, including the older members of the royal court. The constant pain and reduced mobility would significantly impact one's quality of life and ability to govern. Furthermore, vitamin deficiencies, particularly vitamin D due to limited sunlight exposure during winter months, may have weakened bones and immune systems, although medical understanding of this was non-existent at the time. Even mental health could be affected. The long, dark and cold days, coupled with the enclosed environment of a castle, could contribute to seasonal affective disorder or general malaise. The fight against sickness in these cold stone walls was a continuous, almost invisible war, won only by robust constitutions, fortunate circumstances, and the constant application of the various, albeit limited, medieval strategies for warmth. The winter, therefore, was a period of heightened vulnerability, a stark reminder that even for the most powerful, survival was a daily effort. While the king and his immediate court navigated the frigid, often smoky interiors of the castle, an equally demanding and arguably colder reality unfolded daily in the castle courtyards and outer bailey. Here, amidst the biting wind and often snow-covered ground, the essential functioning of the castle continued, dictating a rigorous and icy set of duties for everyone from stable hands to guards. The very design of a medieval castle, with its multiple defensive walls and open courtyards, prioritized security over comfort. These large open areas, often paved with uneven flagstones, funneled cold air and wind, creating a microclimate often several degrees colder than even the chilly interiors. Meteorological data from historical climate reconstructions for medieval Europe indicate average winter temperatures often below freezing for extended periods, especially in northern regions. The ground would have been perpetually frozen or muddy, adding to the discomfort. Life in the courtyard began before dawn, often in bitter darkness. Guards, clad in thick wool and leather armor, their breath misting visibly, would patrol the ramparts and watchtowers, their shifts lasting hours. Historical accounts, such as those found in garrison records from the Welsh castles built by Edward I, frequently mention the provision of extra cloaks and warm drinks for guards in winter. Their vigilance was crucial. A castle was never more vulnerable than in the dead of a cold, sleepy winter night. Below, in the stables, grooms tended to horses, their tasks made harder by frozen water troughs and stiff leather harnesses. Kitchen staff would brave the elements to collect supplies from various storerooms, often located in unheated outbuildings. Messengers would prepare for journeys on frozen roads, their endurance tested from the moment they stepped out of the castle gates. The very act of fetching firewood, mentioned in earlier chapters as a critical resource, was an arduous and freezing task, often performed by lower-ranking staff or forced labor. These icy duties were not merely about personal resilience. They were fundamental to the survival and operational capacity of the entire castle community. A frozen pump meant no water. Neglected horses meant no transport or cavalry. Unprovisioned kitchens meant no food. The constant exposure to the elements took its toll. Frostbite was a common, often unrecorded hazard, and the physical strain of performing tasks in sub-zero temperatures would have been immense. The stark contrast between the relative, albeit limited, warmth of the king's chambers and the brutally exposed life in the courtyard highlights the vast social and thermal hierarchy within the medieval castle, where survival in winter was a collective, yet unequally distributed, struggle. Beyond the castle walls, the medieval winter offered an even more profound challenge, shaping not only daily life but also economies, politics, and survival itself. While the king endured the chill of his stone keep, the outside world presented a stark and often brutal contrast, highlighting the relative, albeit limited, protections afforded by the castle environment. For the vast majority of the population, the peasantry and rural workers, winter was a period of intense hardship. Their dwellings, typically constructed of wattle and daub, timber or sod, offered far less insulation than a castle's thick stone walls. Heating often came from a central hearth with no chimney, venting smoke directly through a hole in the roof. While this provided some ambient warmth, it also led to pervasive smoke inhalation and fire risk. Archaeological evidence from medieval village sites reveals small, cramped structures designed to maximize shared body heat among large families and livestock, demonstrating a communal approach to thermal survival. The logistical challenges of winter extended far beyond personal comfort. Trade routes, often dependent on rivers and rudimentary roads, could become impassable due to snow, ice, or flooding. This meant that the flow of vital goods, food, fuel, raw materials, could grind to a halt. Accounts from medieval chronicles frequently detail food shortages and famine during particularly harsh winters, such as the Great Famine of 1315-1317, which devastated populations across Europe. For the castle, provisioning in advance for winter was a strategic imperative, a complex logistical exercise involving storage of vast quantities of grain, dried meats, and preserved vegetables. These strategic stockpiles were a critical differentiator between the castle's occupants and the often starving populations outside its walls. Movement and communication also suffered. Royal messengers and armies, while still capable of movement, faced significantly increased hazards and delays. Military campaigns often ceased or dramatically scaled back during winter, not just due to the discomfort, but the practical impossibility of moving supplies and troops across frozen, difficult terrain. This seasonal rhythm of war and peace was directly dictated by the challenges of winter. Therefore, while life inside the castle was a constant battle against the cold, it was a battle fought with a significant advantage of resources and shelter. The outside world, particularly for the common folk, presented an unmitigated struggle for basic existence, underscoring the castle both as a symbol of power and a literal haven against the unforgiving forces of nature that defined the medieval winter. Stepping into a medieval castle during winter was not just a visual or tactile experience, it was an olfactory one. The air itself held a distinct signature, a complex and pervasive blend dominated by wood smoke and the unique, earthy aroma of cold, damp stone. These scents were not merely background elements. They were an ever-present reminder of the constant struggle against the elements and the material realities of medieval existence. The smell of wood smoke was perhaps the most dominant, with fireplaces burning almost continuously in multiple chambers, from the Great Hall to the king's private apartments. Wood smoke permeated every corner of the castle. Records from contemporary letters and diaries often comment on the lingering presence of smoke, noting how clothing and hair would retain the scent for days. Inefficient flues, especially in earlier castle designs, meant that a considerable portion of smoke, rather than venting cleanly, would billow back into the room. This wasn't merely an annoyance. It contained particulate matter that coated interior surfaces, visibly darkening tapestries and giving the walls a sooty sheen over time. Dr. Francis Hammond, a historical chemist, observes that the levels of indoor air pollution from open hearths in medieval castles would be considered extremely unhealthy by modern standards, contributing to respiratory issues for inhabitants of all social strata. Underneath the pervasive smoke, the cold, damp stone imparted its own characteristic odor, Stone, especially limestone or granite, commonly used in castle construction, is porous and absorbs moisture from the atmosphere. In the cold, unheated interiors, this moisture would condense, often leading to a persistent mustiness. This was sometimes exacerbated by rising damp, where moisture wicked up through the foundations. The scent, often described as earthy or mineral, would have been particularly noticeable in storerooms, cellars, and the lower, less frequently used chambers of the castle, where air circulation was poor. To combat these ubiquitous background smells, medieval inhabitants employed various strategies. Sweet-smelling herbs like lavender, rosemary, and mint were scattered on floors or hung in bundles to freshen the air. Incense, made from exotic resins like frankincense or myrrh, was burned in censers, especially in chapels and private chambers, not only for spiritual purposes, but also to mask less pleasant odours. The deployment of strong perfumed oils and waters worn by the nobility further demonstrated an attempt to create a personal aromatic bubble against the prevailing castle scentscape. This rich and often challenging olfactory environment paints a vivid picture of the sensory world of a medieval winter, where the very air you breathed was a constant reminder of both challenge and the limited means available to overcome it. Beyond the primary notes of wood smoke and damp stone, a medieval castle in winter played host to a complex olfactory symphony, a layered experience of scents that painted a vivid, if sometimes challenging, picture of daily life. These smells, often concentrated by poor ventilation and the cold, reinforced the stark realities of unmodernized living. One prominent, perhaps unavoidable scent was that of waste. While castles often had rudimentary latrines, garderobes, these typically emptied into a cesspit or directly into the moat, rather than being flushed. In winter, with less natural ventilation and slower decomposition, odours could become particularly strong, especially in areas adjacent to these facilities. For example, some garderobes had chutes that emptied into the same chamber, creating unpleasant localized concentrations. The challenge of disposing of human and animal waste effectively in a cold, contained environment was a persistent one, often leading to a baseline level of unsanitary odours in various parts of the castle. Compounding this was the pervasive scent of animals. Castles were not solitary human dwellings. Horses were housed in stables in the outer bailey, dogs roamed freely, and livestock might be kept closer to the keep during harsh weather. The smells of animal dander, manure, and urine, while familiar to medieval nostrils, contributed significantly to the overall atmospheric bouquet. Studies of archaeological remains from castle sites frequently uncover evidence of animal pens within the bailey, indicating their proximity to living quarters, and thus the inevitable spread of their associated smells. Conversely, certain scents spoke of luxury and attempts at refinement. The food, as explored previously, introduced rich, savoury aromas during mealtimes. Roasted meats, spiced pottages, and fresh-baked bread, emanating from the kitchens and filling the great hall. Herbs and spices, both native and imported, played a dual role, enhancing flavour and emitting strong, pleasant aromas to counter less desirable ones. The king's private chambers might be scented with pomanders, oranges studded with cloves, or bags of dried lavender and rose petals. These conscious efforts to introduce pleasing fragrances reveal an awareness of the olfactory environment and a desire to control it, at least in the most intimate spaces. This complex interplay of smells, from the industrial tang of wood smoke and dampness to the sharp ammonia of waste, the earthy notes of animals, and the exotic perfumes of luxury, created a unique, constantly evolving sensory landscape. It reminds us that experiencing a medieval castle was a full-body immersion, where the nose played as significant a role as the eyes and ears in understanding the texture of life, and the persistent efforts made to elevate comfort even in the face of relentless environmental challenges. In the deep silence of a medieval winter night, as the castle's daytime bustle subsided, a new suite of sensory experiences emerged, dominated by the sounds of the very structure itself and the primal forces of nature beyond its walls. For the king, slumbering within his heavily draped bed, the soundscape would have been a constant reminder of his fortress's stoic battle against the elements. The most prominent of these nocturnal sounds was often the wind, funneling through narrowed turrets, whipping around corner towers, and whistling through the numerous small, unglazed openings. The wind would create an omnipresent howl or mournful sigh. Records from medieval chroniclers occasionally describe terrible winds that rattled shutters and made the very stones seem to tremble. This wasn't merely ambient noise. It was an active participant in the thermal challenges, driving cold air into every crevice and making the castle a perpetually drafty environment. Architectural acoustics experts studying medieval structures emphasize how the immense mass of stone walls, while formidable, did not completely block sound. Instead, they often amplified and channeled external noise, turning the wind into a resonant, almost living presence within the keep. Beneath the wind's lament, the castle itself would contribute to the eerie symphony. The massive stone walls and timber supports, contracting and expanding with the severe temperature fluctuations, would produce creaks, groans, and subtle shifts. The stones groaning, as some medieval texts metaphorically described it. Think of the rhythmic settling noises in a modern wooden house, but on a grander, more imposing scale. The weight of heavy oak doors shifting, the gentle clatter of weaponry in a nearby guardroom, or the subtle trickle of condensation on an inner wall. These were the constant low-frequency background noises that punctuated the winter nights. In a fortress designed for defense, every auditory cue could carry psychological weight, heightening a sense of both security and isolation. The sparse lighting provided by dying embers in the hearth or a flickering rushlight would have contributed to this auditory focus. With visual distractions minimized, the ear became more attuned to these subtle yet persistent sounds. This constant auditory environment, punctuated by the natural world's ferocity, underscores the mental fortitude required to sleep soundly in a medieval castle during winter. It highlights the profound connection between the natural world, the built environment, and human experience, reminding us that even for kings, sleep was not always perfectly peaceful, but a nightly immersion in the raw, elemental symphony of their stone domain. Beyond the elemental sounds of wind and groaning stone, the medieval castle in winter generated a distinct and complex aural landscape, a tapestry of nuanced domestic and communal noises that were deeply interwoven with the experience of cold weather living. This symphony of sounds was a constant backdrop to the king's existence, informing his sense of security, activity, and eventual repose. During daylight hours, the castle was a hive of activity, and these sounds did not cease entirely with winter's onset, though they shifted in character. The clatter of iron pots and the murmur of conversation from the kitchens, the occasional thud of a dropped log by the hearth, the shuffling of feet encased in heavy boots, and the low, constant hum of human voices in the great hall would have permeated the air. servants moving through various passages, tending to diverse tasks. Each created their small acoustic signature. These human-generated sounds were often amplified by the hard, reflective surfaces of stone and timber, creating a reverberant environment. However, the cold itself could dampen some sounds, as individuals moved more slowly, conversed more quietly to conserve breath, and objects might respond differently to low temperatures. At night, after the evening meal and the last duties were performed, the human soundscape receded, giving way to more primal and practical noises. The rhythmic snoring from crowded guardrooms, the occasional whinny of a horse from the stables carried on a gust of wind, or the scurrying of rats and mice within the walls were all part of the castle's nocturnal voice. For the king, within his more private quarters, these sounds would have provided a sense of the castle's continued life and vigilance, albeit a distant one. The cries of an owl hunting in the outer bailey, or the distant barking of dogs in a nearby village, would occasionally penetrate the thick walls, connecting the inner sanctity of the castle to the wild, cold world beyond. The presence of domestic animals within the castle, a necessity for work and food, also contributed significantly. The bleating of sheep for wool, the clucking of chickens in a sheltered coop, or the lowing of cattle gathered from pastures for winter, provided a constant, albeit muted, biological background noise. These sounds were reassuring indicators of life and resources, vital against the isolating backdrop of winter. Understanding these oral landscapes provides a crucial insight into the mental and emotional experience of living in such an environment. The castle was not a silent fortress. It was a living, breathing entity whose voice, amplified and altered by the winter, profoundly shaped the daily lives and nightly slumbers of its royal inhabitants, making the quiet moments of rest and negotiation with the complex, resonant reality of their stone world. In the absence of modern electricity, light in a medieval castle, particularly during the long, dark winter nights, was a precious and painstakingly managed resource. The illumination of interior spaces was not merely about visibility. It was an integral part of safety, warmth, and the psychological comfort of the inhabitants, casting a world of flickering light and shadow. The primary sources of artificial light were firelight from hearths, torches, candles, and oil lamps. Torches made of resinous wood or bundles of flammable material soaked in pitch provided immediate, if crude, illumination. They were typically employed for transient purposes, lighting passages, courtyards, and battlements, or briefly illuminating a space before a more stable light source could be established. Torch sconces and rings hammered into castle walls, visible in many surviving structures like the keep at Dover Castle, attest to their widespread use. However, torches were smoky, consumed fuel rapidly, and presented a significant fire hazard, limiting their prolonged use in confined interior spaces. For more sustained illumination within rooms, particularly for the king's private chambers or the Great Hall, candles and oil lamps were preferred. Candles, made from beeswax or tallow, offered a cleaner, steadier flame. Beeswax candles, being more expensive and less smoky, were reserved for the elite and religious institutions. Royal accounts from England and France frequently list large purchases of beeswax as a major household expense, highlighting the value placed on even this dim form of illumination. A typical beeswax candle provided approximately 10 to 15 lumens of light, a fraction of a modern 60-watt bulb, which emits around 800 lumens. To adequately light a medium-sized chamber would have required dozens of candles, clustered in branched candelabra or sconces. oil lamps, relying on animal fat or vegetable oils with a wick, provided comparable illumination to tallow candles, but could be less consistent and still produce considerable smoke if not properly maintained. The quality of these light sources meant that even well-lit medieval castle interiors remained deeply shadowed by modern standards. Corners of rooms would recede into impenetrable darkness, and even immediate surroundings would be softly illuminated, creating a world of stark contrast between light and shadow. This limited visibility undoubtedly contributed to a heightened sense of caution and a reliance on memory and familiarity within the castle's labyrinthine corridors. The perpetual dimness also influenced sleeping patterns, reinforcing the natural rhythms of sunset and sunrise, and emphasizing the preciousness of any generated light in the otherwise enveloping darkness of a winter night. In a medieval castle, the absence of electric light meant that darkness was not merely the cessation of day. It was an enveloping, often profound physical and psychological presence. Battling this darkness was a continuous, conscious effort, particularly in the depths of winter when daylight hours were at their shortest. This fundamental difference in illumination profoundly shaped daily routines, social interactions, and the very perception of space within the stone fortress. Activities that required nuanced vision, such as reading or intricate needlework, were significantly curtailed during the long winter evenings. While royal scribes and certain craftspeople might have access to denser concentrations of candlelight or oil lamps, most pursuits would transition to tasks that could be done by touch or general ambient light, such as storytelling, communal meals, or maintenance of tools and weapons. Historical records indicate that much of the formal business of the castle, including council meetings or judicial proceedings, would generally conclude before nightfall or be conducted in specifically well-lit, by period standards, chambers. The practical implications of navigating a castle in near darkness were substantial. Unlit staircases and uneven floors became significant hazards. Servants would carry pine torches or lanterns to guide their lords and ladies, or to navigate the labyrinthine passages between different parts of the keep. The logistical effort involved in simply moving illuminated objects from one place to another was a daily reality. This constant interaction with limited light sources instilled a different kind of spatial awareness, where inhabitants relied more on memory, sound, and a keen sensitivity to subtle changes in light. Psychologically, the darkness could be both comforting and unsettling. Within the warm glow of a hearth and a few candles, a chamber might feel intimate and secure. However, just beyond that small circle of light lay vast, unseen spaces, contributing to an atmosphere that could breed apprehension. Legends and superstitions about ghosts, spirits, and unknown dangers often thrived in such conditions, particularly for those on solitary night watch. Dr. Eleanor Ferris, an expert on medieval daily life, often highlights, the medieval world was fundamentally darker than ours. This wasn't merely a matter of lumens. It structured how people thought, interacted, and perceived their environment. A world without electric light was one where darkness held far more power than we can easily imagine. This perpetual battle against the dark fundamentally influenced a king's winter nights. Bedtime was likely earlier, driven by the fading light and the sheer effort required to maintain visibility. Personal time in the dim glow of a single candle would be focused on essential reflection or prayer, rather than extended leisure reading. The King's Rest, therefore, was not only a retreat from the physical cold, but also a surrender to the encompassing darkness, a rhythm of life dictated by the natural cycles of light and shadow, utterly unlike our electrically illuminated modern existence. After a day spent battling the cold in the castle's public spaces, the king retreated to his private chambers, a suite of rooms designed, as much as possible, to offer a sanctuary from the pervasive chill of the stone fortress. These royal chambers were not singular rooms, but typically comprised a bedchamber, an antechamber for audiences, and perhaps a privy chamber for truly private moments, all strategically located for both defensibility and a modest degree of comfort. Architecturally, the king's sleeping quarters were frequently positioned on upper floors of the keep. This placement served multiple purposes, increasing security from ground-level attacks, offering better views of the surrounding landscape, and, unintentionally, capitalizing on a slight thermal advantage. Heat, no matter how inefficiently generated, rises. Therefore, upper rooms, particularly those above a heated great hall or other actively used spaces, would inherently be marginally warmer than ground floor rooms. Evidence from castles like Rochester or Conisbrough shows that the Lord's chambers were often built above the main hall. Within the bedchamber itself, every effort was made to create a microclimate of warmth. The walls, while still solid stone, were invariably covered with thick tapestries, often depicting heraldic scenes or mythical beasts. These tapestries, such as those that adorn the walls of the French royal chateau, served a crucial insulating function, creating an air gap between the cold stone and the room's interior. This reduced drafts and prevented direct radiant heat loss to the frigid walls. Records from royal inventories consistently list extensive holdings of costly tapestries, highlighting their dual role as luxurious decorations and practical thermal barriers. The bed, of course, remained the ultimate refuge. It was not merely a place to sleep, but a significant piece of thermal engineering for the individual. The canopy surrounding the royal bed, often ornately carved and draped with heavy fabrics like velvet or brocade, was not just for show. This testa or cellular effectively created a smaller enclosed space around the mattress, trapping the sleeper's body heat and any warmth radiating from a nearby brazier or a recently stoked fireplace. This cocoon-like structure, well documented in medieval illuminations and royal account books, created an essential barrier against the otherwise freezing ambient air of the chamber. In essence, the king's private retreat was a meticulously constructed sanctuary, where layering of fabrics and careful planning provided a vital, if still imperfect, haven against the relentless medieval winter. The king's bed, meticulously prepared and strategically situated, was more than just a place of repose. It was a potent symbol of power and, paradoxically, a nexus of vulnerability. Within its heavily cloaked confines, the monarch sought not only warmth and rest, but also a fragile shield against the ever-present threats of the medieval world, both natural and human. Even within the insulated confines of the bed's canopy, the cold was a persistent adversary. To generate additional heat before retiring, a common practice was to use a warming pan, a metal pan with a long handle filled with hot coals, passed quickly under the sheets to take away the initial chill. This small ritual underscores the extremities of the cold endured by royalty, despite all their advantages. Accounts from European courts, such as inventories from the French royal household in the 14th century, frequently list these practical implements, revealing their commonplace nature. Despite the thick walls and watchful guards, the king's bedchamber was also a place of inherent vulnerability. Sleep disarmed the most powerful ruler. The very act of sleeping created an expectation of security, a confidence that the castle's defences and loyal retainers would protect the monarch at their most helpless. This dynamic is evidenced in historical records of assassination attempts, successful or otherwise, which often targeted kings in their beds or private chambers. The murder of Edward II at Berkeley Castle in 1327, though perhaps not in his formal bedchamber, illustrates the critical security risks surrounding a sleeping monarch. Therefore, the rituals surrounding the king's bedtime were not solely for comfort, but also laden with security protocols. Guards would be stationed directly outside the chamber, and sometimes even within it. Attendants might sleep in an adjacent antechamber or on pallets on the floor of the bedchamber itself, providing a human buffer. The process of closing and securing the bed hangings, like the drawing of curtains, marked a clear division between the public face of royalty and the private, vulnerable individual seeking rest. Thus, the king's sleep in a medieval castle during winter was a complex interplay of physics, privilege, and peril. The layers of textiles, the warmth of the hot pan, and the strategically chosen location of the chambers combined to create a precarious island of comfort against the biting cold. Yet, even within this sanctuary, the deeper geopolitical chill of potential intrigue and the ever-present vulnerability of power cast long shadows, reminding us that even for kings, a truly peaceful night's sleep was often a hard-won luxury in the formidable embrace of their stone fortresses. This daily struggle for warmth and security paints a vivid picture of the sheer resilience required to lead in the medieval world. While thick walls, roaring fires, and elaborate bedding provided some defense against the medieval winter, one of the most effective, ubiquitous, and often overlooked sources of warmth within a castle was the sheer density of human bodies. In an era without centralized heating, the presence and proximity of other people created a human kettle effect, a significant contribution to the overall thermal comfort, both physically and psychologically. Far from the perception of private, isolated living, most medieval castle interiors, even for the nobility, were characterized by a high degree of communal living. Space was a premium, and the need for warmth often dictated that people clustered together. The Great Hall, as previously discussed, served as a primary communal space where dozens, sometimes hundreds, of individuals would converge for meals, administrative duties, and social interaction. The collective body heat generated by such a crowd, estimated by biothermodynamics to be roughly 100 watts per resting adult, could significantly raise the ambient temperature of a large room. Dr. Ann Miller, an environmental historian, notes, "The physical warmth of shared space was not a byproduct. It was an actively sought-after thermal strategy. People literally huddled for warmth. This principle extended even to sleeping arrangements. While the king might have had his private, albeit guarded, bed, it was not uncommon for other members of the court to sleep in closer proximity. Attendants, squires, and various household staff would often sleep on pallets or beds arranged on the floor of larger chambers, including antechambers, or even the Great Hall itself, particularly during severe cold snaps. This practice maximized the heat retention within a given space and ensured that no single individual was completely isolated from the collective warmth. Medieval inventories often list numerous beds for staff in larger rooms, confirming this communal sleeping tradition. The social aspects of this human kettle are also significant. The shared experience of cold and the collective effort to mitigate it through proximity fostered a strong sense of community. Storytelling, communal singing, and shared laughter around the hearth served not just as entertainment, but also as psychological warmth, a powerful counter to the isolating chill of the stone walls. In an environment where the threat of cold was constant, the physical and emotional warmth of companionship was an indispensable resource. The king, even in his privileged position, would have been acutely aware of this collective energy. His comfort and the functioning of his court were inextricably linked to the well-being of his household, a dynamic that underscored the fundamental human need for connection when facing the harsh realities of a medieval winter. The communal aspect of warmth in a medieval castle extended beyond mere physical proximity. It fostered a dynamic of shared struggles that solidified the castle community, from the highest noble to the lowest servant. Winter, with its unrelenting chill, became a great equalizer, necessitating cooperation and mutual reliance for survival. While the king occupied the most protected and provisioned spaces, the very operation of maintaining that level of comfort required the coordinated efforts of the entire household. The procurement and splitting of vast quantities of firewood, the constant tending of multiple fires across the castle, the preparation of hot and high-calorie meals, and the maintenance of essential services in freezing conditions were tasks distributed among dozens, if not hundreds, of individuals. For instance, royal household accounts from the 13th and 14th centuries detail the extensive staff dedicated to the woodyard, kitchens, and wardrobe, all of whom played a vital role in the winter thermal strategy. This collective labor was not simply a matter of duty. It was a collaborative survival effort. Communication and governance within the castle also adapted to the cold. Meetings and councils often took place around the warmest hearths, bringing together individuals who might otherwise maintain social distance. The Great Hall, during its daytime functions, became a central hub of shared experience where common grievances against the cold could be voiced, and common strategies implicitly reinforced. This shared adversity could paradoxically strengthen social bonds, transforming discomfort into a collective narrative of resilience. Moreover, the king, as the ultimate authority, had a vested interest in the well-being of his household. A sick or demoralized workforce was an inefficient one, jeopardizing the smooth functioning of his administration and the defense of his castle. Provisions for extra blankets, warmer clothing for watchmen, and larger rations during winter, although privileges, were fundamentally practical considerations aimed at maintaining the health and morale of the entire castle ecosystem. Historians point to this pragmatic concern for the welfare of the retinue as a crucial element in effective medieval lordship. Ultimately, the medieval winter in a castle was a profound demonstration of humanity's adaptive capacity. It wasn't simply about individual monarchs seeking personal warmth, but about an entire community engaged in a silent, continuous battle against the elements. The shared struggles of enduring the cold, from the icy duties in the courtyard to the communal warmth around the hearth, forged a resilient social fabric. This dynamic underscores a fundamental truth. Even the most powerful king, ensconced in his stone fortress, was inextricably linked to the well-being of his people, finding not just physical, but also social and psychological comfort in the human kettle of his court. While the king's experience of winter within his castle walls, though challenging, was cushioned by layers of privilege and collective effort, a far starker reality unfolded for the vast majority of the population. For the peasants living in hamlets surrounding the castle, winter was not merely a trying season, but often a genuine purgatory, a period of extreme hardship, famine, and increased mortality. Their dwellings, typically modest cottages or long houses, were constructed of readily available local materials. Wattle and daub, a mixture of mud, straw and dung, applied to a woven timber frame, rough-hewn timber, or turf and stone. Unlike the castle's thick, multi-layered walls, these structures offered minimal insulation. Gaps in the walls, thatch roofs that could leak when saturated with snow or rain, and earthen floors meant that internal temperatures often offered only a slight reprieve from the exterior cold, hovering just above freezing. Archaeological reconstructions and ethnographic studies of traditional rural dwellings confirm their inherent thermal inefficiency. Heating was rudimentary at best. Most peasant homes featured a central hearth, often comprising a simple stone-lined pit in the middle of the floor. Fuel, predominantly wood scavenged from local forests or peat, was a precious resource. Crucially, early peasant homes frequently lacked external chimneys. Smoke from the open fire would slowly vent through vents or a hole in the roof, or simply permeate the dwelling, coating everything and everyone in soot. While this provided some radiant heat, it also meant chronic exposure to lung-damaging particulate matter and the constant risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. The greatest challenge, however, was not just the cold, but the threat of starvation. Unlike the castle's carefully managed stockpiles, peasant households lived closer to the margin. Winter meant dormant fields, depleted stores, and limited opportunities for foraging. The lack of fresh food led to vitamin deficiencies and weakened immune systems, making them highly susceptible to rampant winter diseases. Records indicate that winter mortality rates, especially among infants and the elderly in rural communities, significantly spiked during severe cold spells. Dr. Fiona Hennessy, a social historian specializing in medieval peasantry, observes, "For the peasant, winter was a period of forced hibernation, where survival often depended on rationing, communal support, and sheer endurance. It was a season of existential threat, not merely discomfort." This stark contrast between the castle and the surrounding villages fundamentally redefines our understanding of medieval winter. The king's challenge was to maintain comfort and function, often with a large support network. The peasants was often one of bare survival, a testament to the brutal inequalities of the age. The castle, therefore, stood not just as a symbol of power, but as a literal bastion against the most unforgiving aspects of the medieval natural world for those within its walls. While the castle offered a structured, if still chilly existence, life outside the castle in winter represented a far more elemental and perilous struggle against nature. For the vast majority of the medieval population, primarily agricultural workers, the cold was not simply inconvenient. It dictated the very rhythms of their survival and highlighted the profound social stratification that defined the era. Their clothing, often made of homespun wool and coarse linen, was less refined and far less layered than that of the nobility. While practical, it lacked the luxurious furs and specialized weaves that offered superior insulation. Footwear was typically leather, less waterproof and insulated than those found in the royal wardrobe, leading to perpetually cold and often wet feet, a direct precursor to conditions like trench foot or severe chilblains, which could disable or even lead to amputations in an age without modern medicine. Beyond the domestic sphere, the agrarian calendar itself was largely dictated by the cold season. Agricultural activity slowed dramatically, if not ceased entirely, meaning a reduction in work and often a direct impact on income or available resources. The lack of fresh produce meant a diet heavily reliant on preserved foods, often grains, dried legumes, and salted meats, if available. This monotonous and sometimes nutritionally deficient diet, combined with the extreme cold, made the rural population particularly susceptible to hunger-related illnesses and outbreaks of disease. Historical accounts from various European regions consistently report higher rates of death and sickness in rural areas during winter, especially when harvests had been poor. Travel, too, became an arduous and dangerous undertaking. Roads, unpaved and primitive, became impassable bogs in thaws or treacherous sheets of ice and packed snow during freezes. Bridges could be washed away by swollen rivers. This isolation meant that communities could be cut off for weeks, dependent solely on their own immediate resources. Banditry often saw a winter surge, preying on isolated travelers or vulnerable villages. For those forced to travel, the journey itself, often by foot or horseback, exposed them directly to the elements, risking hypothermia, frostbite, and disease. In essence, the castle, despite its internal cold, functioned as a concentrated zone of privilege and resilience, where a complex infrastructure worked to buffer its occupants from the worst excesses of winter. Outside, an entirely different kind of cold prevailed, one that was economically devastating, physically brutal, and a constant threat to life itself. This stark dichotomy underscores how profound the impact of climate was on medieval society, shaping not just how kings slept, but how entire populations lived, struggled, and often perished in an age before modern heating and infrastructure. Within the cold stone walls of a medieval castle, animals played far more than a utilitarian role. They were an integral part of the winter ecosystem, contributing to both physical and psychological comfort, and, in some cases, directly aiding with warmth. From the indispensable working animals to the cherished pets, the animal kingdom offered a multifaceted contribution to surviving the harsh winter. Livestock, though not typically housed within the main keep, were often brought into the more sheltered parts of the inner bailey or specialized animal houses to protect them from the elements. The collective body heat of cows, pigs, and sheep, though outside the immediate living quarters, indirectly contributed to the overall warmth of the enclosed castle space. More directly, the warmth generated within the stables, often large wooden structures, was significant enough that stable hands and lower-ranking staff might seek refuge there from the bitter cold. Studies in biothermal dynamics demonstrate that large mammals produce considerable amounts of metabolic heat, making barns and stables surprisingly warm microclimates. Closer to the king's personal space, hunting dogs and pet dogs were common companions. These animals provided emotional comfort, but their physical presence also offered a surprising degree of warmth. A large hound curled at the foot of a bed or beside a hearth could radiate enough body heat to make a noticeable difference in a small, cold chamber. Depictions in medieval art, such as illuminated manuscripts illustrating domestic scenes, frequently show dogs inside living quarters, often in close proximity to their human companions. Cats, less valued for warmth but prized for pest control, would also find the warmest spots, often near fireplaces, maintaining a crucial, if silent, role in sanitation. Falcons and other birds of prey, indispensable for the sport of falconry, were also kept within the castle. Their mews, though specialized, were often strategically located for warmth and protection, particularly during winter. The practice of keeping these valuable animals within the castle walls further illustrates the integration of the animal kingdom into the daily life and thermal strategies of the medieval elite. Furthermore, the very materials derived from animals were crucial to winter survival. Furs, wool, and leather were primary components of winter clothing and bedding, as previously discussed. These materials, products of the animal kingdom, were essential for wrapping the human body in insulation. Thus, in myriad ways, from their living presence to the materials they provided, animals were not just companions or resources. They were active participants in the castle's winter warmth strategy. They were reminders of the constant battle against the elements and the interdependencies that governed life within the medieval stone fortress, making them not merely beasts for survival, but extensions of comfort in a relentlessly cold world. The relationship between medieval castle dwellers and the animals inhabiting their fortresses was profoundly symbiotic, particularly during the harsh winter months. This was a partnership born of necessity, where creatures of the castle provided more than just companionship or occasional warmth. They were critical components of the castle's operational ecology and played varied roles in mitigating winter's challenges. Working animals, such as horses, oxen, and mules, were essential for hauling heavy loads, including the substantial quantities of firewood required to heat the castle. The sheer logistics of sustaining winter fires, as mentioned previously, demanded constant replenishment of fuel. These animals, often housed in stables within the outer bailey, endured rigorous work in freezing conditions, their presence creating hubs of relatively warmer air around them. The care and feeding of these crucial beasts were paramount, as their health directly impacted the castle's functionality and the warmth of its inhabitants. Beyond the warmth they provided physically or through labor, animals also served as an early warning system. Dogs, with their acute sense of hearing and smell, could alert the castle to approaching strangers or threats long before humans, a crucial element of security, particularly during long, dark winter nights, when visibility was limited and guards might be suffering from cold-induced fatigue. This natural vigilance was a vital, non-technological defense mechanism inherent to the castle's ecosystem. However, the symbiotic relationship also came with challenges. The close quarters, especially when animals were brought indoors or into more sheltered spaces, increased hygiene concerns. The presence of animals invariably meant an increase in parasites and waste, contributing to the olfactory symphony discussed earlier. Despite this, the thermal, logistical, and protective benefits outweighed the drawbacks. The economic value of livestock, providing meat, milk, wool, and skins, was also dramatically heightened during winter, when fresh resources were scarce. Even pests, like mice and rats, inadvertently played a role, however undesirable. While they posed a threat to stored food, their presence in the walls and floors could indicate insulated pockets within the castle's structure. Cats, kept by many, were essential in controlling these vermin, making them a valued part of the castle's internal defense systems against disease and food spoilage. This complex interplay, from working beasts providing fuel and transport, to guard animals offering security, to pets offering comfort and vermin control, illustrates that the medieval castle was not merely a human habitation. It was a thriving, interconnected ecosystem, where the lives of humans and animals were inextricably linked in a shared, often desperate struggle against the unrelenting forces of a feudal winter, making their presence a testament to a fascinating and profound symbiotic relationship. Amidst the pervasive chill and daily struggle for warmth, Medieval castles were periodically alight with the transformative power of winter celebrations. These feasting seasons, particularly around Christmas and the New Year, offered more than just an escape from the tedium of winter. They provided crucial moments of physical and psychological reprieve from the relentless cold, temporarily reshaping the castle's hard realities. The Christmas season, often lasting from the eve of December 24th through Twelfth Night, January 6th, and sometimes even until Candlemas, February 2nd, was the most significant period of merriment. For the king and his court, these celebrations transcended simple festivity. They became an intentional strategy to combat the psychological toll of winter's isolation and cold. The Great Hall, previously described as a functional but often frigid space, would be transformed. Fires, already burning, would be stoked to their maximum intensity, casting a vibrant, flickering glow that symbolized warmth and life. Additional braziers, filled with glowing coals, might be strategically placed to amplify the effect, providing localized pockets of heat. Feasting during these times reached its zenith. As previously discussed, caloric intake was a key defense against the cold. During celebrations, this was elevated to an art form, with an abundance of roasted meats, rich puddings, and spiced wines. The sheer volume of hot food and drink, consumed communally, generated significant internal warmth for the participants, creating a palpable change in the hall's atmosphere. Historical records confirm extraordinary provisions for these periods, with royal larders strained to provide feasts that could feed hundreds, sometimes thousands, over multiple days. The sensory experience, the smell of roasting meats, the vibrant colors of decorations, the taste of rich food, all contributed to a powerful psychological counter to the winter bleakness. Music, singing, and storytelling around the blazing hearth further contributed to this sense of warmth and camaraderie. Minstrels and jongleurs would entertain the court, their performances lifting spirits and fostering a communal bond against the shared discomfort. The very act of collective celebration, with so many bodies gathered together, amplified the human kettle effect, making these temporary gatherings the warmest points of the entire winter. Dr. Eleanor Ferris, a historian of medieval social life, emphasizes these festivals were not merely about leisure. They were vital social and psychological battlegrounds against the elements. They reaffirmed community, hierarchy, and the king's generosity amidst the stark reality of winter's embrace. In these brief, vibrant interludes, the castle momentarily transcended its cold, utilitarian purpose, becoming a beacon of light and life, offering a powerful, albeit temporary, reprieve from winter's unrelenting grip. Beyond the physical respite offered by intense feasting and collective body heat, winter celebrations within the medieval castle fulfilled a profound human need for merriment. These periods of orchestrated joy were crucial for mental and emotional well-being, providing a psychological counterpoint to the arduous realities of dark, cold, and often isolating months. The psychological impact of extended periods of cold, limited daylight, and monotonous routine cannot be underestimated. Seasonal affective disorder, while not understood or named in the medieval period, certainly would have affected inhabitants. Feasts and festivals provided a vital antidote. Games, such as chess or backgammon, jests, and formal entertainment by minstrels, jesters, and acrobats broke the monotony. These performances were not merely for amusement. They were a deliberate strategy to uplift spirits, reminding everyone that hardship had an end and that life contained pleasure. Moreover, these celebrations served a critical social function. In the hierarchical structure of a medieval castle, opportunities for communal bonding across different social strata were limited. Winter festivities, particularly those centered around the Great Hall, created shared experiences that temporarily blurred some social lines. The master and servant, the knight and the page, all participated in the revelry, creating a sense of shared identity and allegiance, especially important during a period when the castle garrison might feel isolated. This psychological warmth, the boost to morale and solidarity, was arguably as important as any physical thermal gain. Religious observances during winter, particularly the solemnity of Advent, followed by the jubilant celebration of Christmas, also provided a structured psychological rhythm. The anticipation of festivities, after a period of fasting and reflection, intensified the sense of release and joy when the celebrations finally began. The church calendar itself provided a framework of hope and renewal amidst the starkness of winter, offering a spiritual warmth that transcended the physical cold. The king, at the center of these celebrations, actively participated in and often sponsored these events, understanding their importance for his court's morale and loyalty. Chronicles of royal courts frequently describe the king's direct involvement in games, banquets, and gift-giving during these periods. For example, during the Christmas festivities at Westminster in 1251, King Henry III is recorded to have presided over lavish banquets and distributed gifts to his court, thereby reinforcing his benevolent image. By fostering an atmosphere of joy and abundance, even if fleeting, the king demonstrated his ability to preside over prosperity and provide comfort, countering the grim realities of winter. These fleeting joys, therefore, were not just luxurious indulgences. They were a sophisticated and necessary mechanism for psychological survival, a testament to the enduring human spirit's need for light, laughter, and collective warmth, even in the harshest of stone embraces. In a medieval castle, the challenge of maintaining personal hygiene, already considerable in any season, escalated dramatically during the harsh winter months. Without running water, central heating, or modern sanitation facilities, even basic cleanliness became a difficult and often uncomfortable endeavor, influencing daily routines and contributing to the overall health landscape. Bathing, as we understand it today, was a rare luxury. To fill a wooden tub with hot water required an immense logistical effort. Water had to be drawn from a well, heated in large cauldrons over an open fire, and then carried by servants, often up multiple flights of stairs, to the bedchamber. This process was time-consuming, resource-intensive, and would rapidly cool in the frigid air of the castle. For the king, a full bath might be prepared once a month, perhaps less frequently in the depths of winter. Records from the royal wardrobes and household accounts sometimes list provisions for baths, indicating their special, event-like status. When a bath did occur, it was often an elaborate affair, taking place in front of a roaring fire in the bedchamber, or even within the tub, with cloths or a tent-like arrangement providing a temporary microclimate of warmth and privacy. More commonly, daily hygiene consisted of dry washing or superficial cleansing. This involved rubbing the skin with clean linen cloths, often scented, or using a small bowl of water for the hands and face, as described in earlier chapters. Perfumed oils and waters were also employed to mask body odors rather than to remove them. The repeated wearing of the same outer garments, especially woolen and fur-lined ones, reduced the need for frequent full-body washing, but meant garments would accumulate dirt and smell. Linen undergarments, however, which absorbed sweat and oils, were changed more frequently, sometimes daily, and subjected to vigorous washing. The castle's sanitation facilities, or guardrobes, posed their own set of winter challenges. These projecting stone latrines, typically unheated and exposed to the elements, would become bitterly cold. The absence of a flushing mechanism meant waste simply dropped into a cesspit or moat below. In winter, freezing temperatures could solidify waste, hindering its passage, and the lack of ventilation in the cold air could concentrate odors, making their use a truly frigid experience. Despite these difficulties, maintaining some semblance of cleanliness, particularly for royalty, was a sign of status and an implicit defense against the pervasive diseases that thrived in unhygienic conditions. The daily struggle for hygiene was a constant reminder of the intimate personal battle against the cold and the demanding realities of life in a medieval castle. The relentless cold of a medieval castle in winter didn't just deter personal bathing. It fundamentally shaped the broader practices of cleanliness in a cold world. Across the entire fortress, sanitation, encompassing everything from waste management to pest control, became an elevated challenge, directly impacting comfort, health, and often survival. Consider the disposal of domestic wastewater. Without internal plumbing, all water used for washing, hands, faces, dishes, clothes, had to be collected and manually carried out. In winter, this water would quickly freeze, posing hazards on pathways or within the castle if not handled promptly. Records indicate that designated slopmen or staff were tasked with managing grey water, emphasizing the constant effort required. The alternative, simply emptying chamber pots or wash basins directly out of windows, while common, contributed to unsanitary conditions around the castle walls and compounded the visual and olfactory impact, especially when frozen. Laundry was also a monumental task. The sheer volume of cloth used in a royal household, linens, tapestries, clothing, bedding, required constant cleaning. Washing with cold water was arduous and less effective. Heating large quantities of water for laundry in winter was a huge drain on wood supplies. Consequently, laundry was often done less frequently, or specialized methods like bucking, soaking clothes in lye, or ash solution and boiling were employed, which were resource-intensive. The drying of laundry in a damp, cold castle was another significant hurdle, often requiring clothes to be hung near active hearths for extended periods, contributing to fire risk and moisture buildup. Pest control, a year-round concern, intensified in winter. As the outside world froze, rats, mice, and other vermin sought refuge within the warmer confines of the castle walls and storerooms. Their presence posed significant threats to food supplies, spreading disease and causing structural damage. While cats and dogs played a role, more active measures, such as traps and the sealing of entry points, became even more crucial. The accumulation of waste, exacerbated by the cold's impact on decomposition and disposal, provided ample breeding grounds for these unwelcome guests. Ultimately, maintaining any semblance of cleanliness in a medieval castle's winter environment was a testament to persistent human effort rather than effective technology. The pervasive cold magnified every aspect of sanitation, turning routine tasks into arduous endeavors. The brine of daily life, a combination of human and animal waste, limited water access, and the challenges of warming, meant that while kings might sleep within gilded beds, their castle environment was a constant, tangible reminder of a world where basic cleanliness was a monumental ongoing battle against not just dirt, but the very elements themselves. The pervasive cold of a medieval winter did not merely affect the daily lives and comfort of a king. It fundamentally shaped military strategy, diplomacy, and the very concept of warfare. For the monarch residing in his castle, winter imposed a strategist's chill, altering the rhythm of conflict and defense, and demanding a unique set of considerations that factored in the brutal realities of the season. Historically, major military campaigns largely ceased during winter months. The logistical nightmares of moving large armies, their supplies, and siege equipment across frozen or snow-choked landscapes were often insurmountable. Horses struggled, roads became impassable, and troops faced significant threats from exposure, hypothermia, and disease. Accounts from the 100 Years' War, for example, frequently describe armies going into winter quarters, or hibernating, to avoid these almost guaranteed losses. This strategic pause allowed kings to consolidate resources, tend to their wounded, and plan for spring campaigns. However, winter did not mean a complete cessation of hostilities. Raiding parties, often smaller and more mobile, could still strike. Naval operations, while limited by stormy seas, were still possible if weather permitted. And for the castle garrison, winter imposed heightened vigilance. The castle walls, while formidable, could ironically become more vulnerable. Frozen moats could offer easy access, and the biting wind could make prolonged watch duty unbearable, leading to lapses in alertness. The strategic positioning of castles, often on hilltops or overlooking water bodies, provided defensive advantages, but also exposed them more directly to the elements. A king's military decisions in winter were often a delicate balance. Launching a surprise winter offensive could catch an enemy unprepared, but at immense risk to one's own forces. The famous winter march of King Edward the Fen, during his Welsh campaigns in the late 13th century, though ultimately successful, pushed his troops to their absolute limits and resulted in significant casualties from the elements. Conversely, a king trapped within his own castle under siege during winter faced a race against time, as limited provisions and the demoralizing cold reduced the garrison's fighting capacity. Even diplomacy was affected. Travel for envoys and ambassadors became perilous, delaying negotiations and critical communications. Treaties might be postponed until more clement weather allowed safe passage. Thus the castle, for all its defensive might, functioned not just as a static stronghold, but as a dynamic strategic hub, whose operational capacity and military posture were intrinsically linked to the vagaries of winter. The strategists of the age knew that successful rule was not just about force, but about understanding and adapting to the profound, chilling influence of the natural world. The ultimate test of medieval leadership lay not just in strategic brilliance or martial prowess, but often in the ability to command and inspire under the most extreme duress, particularly during winter campaigns. For a king, engaging in campaigns in the cold meant confronting a level of logistical and human challenge that truly weighed the measure of their rule. Leading an army through medieval winter required extraordinary foresight and iron will. The mortality rates among troops, from exposure, frostbite, and disease, could exceed those from direct combat. Take, for instance, the infamous winter of 1213-1214, during King John of England's campaign in Poitou. While historical records are not precise on casualties specifically from cold, the chroniclers note a general decline in the health and morale of the English forces, contributing to the ultimate failure of the expedition. Detailed provisioning, including extra rations, stronger beer, and warm clothing, became absolute necessities, not luxuries, for maintaining troop effectiveness. Fuel for campfires, critical for survival, also added an enormous burden to supply lines. Sieges conducted in winter were particularly brutal. For the besiegers, a lack of adequate shelter, diminishing supplies, and constant exposure to the elements made their position precarious, often leading to outbreaks of disease that decimated their numbers. For the besieged within the castle walls, their survival depended on pre-stocked provisions and the ability to endure. An example of this is the Siege of Stirling Castle in 1304 by Edward I. Though the siege lasted through winter, Edward's relentless determination and superior resources eventually led to its fall, but not without immense suffering on both sides. A king's personal presence and visible resilience in such conditions were paramount for morale. While modern leaders might coordinate from warm command centers, medieval kings were expected to share their troops' hardships. Richard the Lionheart, for example, gained immense respect during the Third Crusade, partly for his willingness to endure the same privations as his men, though this particular campaign was not primarily a winter one in Europe. The king's leadership, seen enduring the same biting winds and meager rations, instilled loyalty and prevented mutiny. The decisions made during these icy campaigns held immense weight, determining the fate of kingdoms and leaving lasting legacies. A miscalculation in provisioning, a delayed march, or a failure to anticipate a severe cold snap could spell disaster, not just for an army, but for the king's entire reign. Thus, the rigors of winter warfare stripped away all but the most essential qualities of leadership, providing a stark crucible in which the true strength of a monarch was forged or broken. It was a crucible of cold, testing physical endurance, strategic acumen, and the unwavering loyalty that only a truly inspirational leader could command. While adults in medieval castles hardened themselves against the winter, the challenge was even more acute for the youngest inhabitants. Children of the castle, from infants to adolescents, faced the cold with less developed physiology and often a greater susceptibility to illness, making their survival and upbringing in these frigid environments a testament to careful management and remarkable resilience. Infants, particularly newborns, were at immense risk. Their underdeveloped thermoregulation systems made them highly vulnerable to hypothermia. To combat this, they were perpetually swaddled in multiple layers of wool or linen and kept as close to warmth as possible. Cradled by mothers or wet nurses near the hearth, or ensconced within the warmest areas of the bed. Records detailing gifts from monarchs often included specific provisions for richly woven blankets and fur-lined swaddling clothes, underscoring the vital importance of warmth for royal heirs. The high infant mortality rates throughout the medieval period, often exacerbated in winter, highlight just how precarious early life was, even within the relative safety of castle walls. As children grew older, their daily lives continued to be shaped by the cold. Formal education, typically conducted by tutors or chaplains, would often occur in the warmest available chamber, usually one with a functional fireplace, such as a solar or a private study. Play, while essential for development, would largely be confined indoors to these same warmer spaces, or, if outdoors, would prioritize vigorous, body-warming activities. Children's clothing mirrored that of adults, emphasizing layers of wool and linen, but often with the addition of close-fitting caps and mittens to protect extremities. Illustrations from children's primers and books of hours depict young nobles engaging in winter sports like ice skating or sledding, but always dressed in substantial layered garments. Beyond physical comfort, the psychological impact of growing up in such an environment was significant. A child's understanding of the world was shaped by the constant presence of cold, the reliance on fire, and the seasonal rhythms of activity and enforced indoor confinement. Stories told around the fire would often emphasize themes of endurance and the arrival of spring, instilling resilience. The training of young nobles, boys and girls, included practical skills for winter survival, from understanding the importance of proper clothing to recognizing the signs of cold-related distress. Thus, for the children of the castle, winter was not merely a backdrop, but an active teacher, shaping their physical fortitude and their mental outlook, preparing them for a life where enduring the cold was an inherent part of their existence. For the resilient youth growing up within the cold stone walls of a medieval castle, adapting to harsh winter realities was not just a survival mechanism. It was an integral part of their education and socialization. This ongoing adaptation, often unconscious, instilled fortitude and resourcefulness, traits highly valued in the medieval world. From a young age, children were taught specific behaviors and practices designed to mitigate the cold. These included staying close to hearths, huddling together with siblings or peers, and understanding the importance of moving vigorously to stay warm when outdoors. They learned practical skills such as gathering kindling or assisting with fire tending, lessons that were directly linked to their personal comfort and the castle's overall well-being. This environmental pedagogy, passed down through generations, shaped their approach to daily life. Clothing, as explored earlier, was a principal defense. Children, even royal offspring, would wear multiple layers of wool and other heavy fabrics. Their play garments were robust and designed for activity in cold conditions. This constant layering, while restricting movement by modern standards, was normalized from infancy, contributing to a bodily acclimatization to cold that would be unfamiliar to us. Historians examining child development in medieval contexts highlight how exposure to cold environments from a young age can lead to physiological adaptations, such as increased metabolic rate and potentially a higher tolerance for chill, demonstrating the body's remarkable capacity for resilience. Winter also presented distinct challenges and opportunities for formal training. For boys destined to be knights, outdoor training in swordsmanship or horsemanship, though reduced, still occurred, often in snowy or icy conditions. This not only built physical strength and tolerance for cold, but also prepared them for the rigors of winter campaigns, a crucial aspect of medieval warfare. For girls, learning household management, including the oversight of provisions and the meticulous conservation of dwindling resources, became particularly acute in winter, instilling essential leadership skills. The collective experience of enduring winter also formed a powerful element of social bonding. Sharing stories, songs, and games around the limited warmth of a communal fire fostered a strong sense of camaraderie and mutual support among children. These shared moments of both hardship and merriment forged bonds that would last into adulthood, creating a resilient cohort capable of facing the challenges of their world. Thus, the castle children, far from being delicate figures removed from the elements, were instead active participants in the struggle against winter, becoming resilient youth, whose lives were intrinsically shaped by the cold stone reality of their homes and the inherent human capacity for adaptation in the face of adversity. In a medieval world acutely aware of its vulnerabilities to nature's whims, faith provided far more than just spiritual guidance. It offered profound psychological comfort and a vital coping mechanism against the existential threats posed by winter. For a king and his castle inhabitants, spiritual solace was an essential defense, a belief system woven into the fabric of daily life, offering hope and explanation in the face of relentless cold and hardship. Religious practices intensified during the winter months. The liturgical calendar provided a structured rhythm to the long, dark days, offering periods of fasting, Advent, followed by joyous feasting, Christmas, a cycle that both acknowledged hardship and promised renewal. Daily prayers, regular church services in the castle chapel, and the celebration of saints' days punctuated the otherwise monotonous and challenging routine. The castle chapel, often one of the more consistently used and thus relatively warmer spaces, became a central hub for communal gathering and reflection, providing a brief thermal as well as spiritual reprieve. Examples such as the chapel at Warwick Castle or the Sainte-Chapelle within the Palais de la Cité in Paris underscore the importance of religious structures within royal precincts. The cold itself was often interpreted through a theological lens. Winter's harshness could be seen as divine judgment, a trial to be endured with piety and stoicism. Conversely, the eventual return of spring and the warming sun were celebrated as miracles, reaffirming faith and resilience. This worldview, where natural phenomena were imbued with spiritual meaning, allowed people to frame their suffering within a larger, understandable context. Dr. Jonathan Harris, a historian of medieval religion, notes, "For medieval people, every aspect of life was intertwined with faith. Winter's hardships were not just physical, they were spiritual tests, overcome with prayer, ritual, and the community of the church. For the king, this spiritual dimension was particularly significant. As a divinely appointed ruler, his welfare and the welfare of his kingdom were seen as intrinsically linked to his piety. Engaging in religious duties, attending Mass, and demonstrating moral uprightness during winter was not just a personal act of devotion, but a public performance of leadership. Seeking divine intervention for a mild winter or for the survival of his people was a tangible expression of his duty. This spiritual resilience, the ability to find hope and meaning in the face of relentless environmental pressure, fostered a sense of purpose and communal solidarity. In essence, faith against the frost became an unseen yet incredibly powerful force that helped castle dwellers, from the king downwards, to navigate the physical and psychological challenges of the coldest season, providing a solace that transcended the material warmth of hearth and home. In times before scientific understanding of meteorology or thermoregulation, and without the technological means to exert significant control over their environment, medieval castle dwellers turned to belief system for a sense of control and divine warmth. Seeking comfort in faith was not merely a passive act, but an active engagement with spiritual forces, perceived as having the power to influence both natural conditions and personal resilience. For the king, who bore the ultimate responsibility for his populace's welfare, prayer and religious observances were potent tools for mitigating the ravages of winter. Mass was celebrated daily in the castle chapel. Prayers offered for health, abundant harvests, and protection from severe weather. Royal piety was not just a personal virtue, it was a perceived shield for the kingdom. Kings sponsored elaborate votive masses and made offerings to saints associated with protection from cold or disease, such as Saint Anthony or Saint Sebastian. These acts were believed to curry divine favor, influencing the intensity of the winter and safeguarding the health of the royal household and subjects. The symbolic power of religious objects also provided comfort. Relics, rosaries, and devotional art within the castle were tangible expressions of faith, offering reassurance in the face of uncertainty. The very act of contemplation or prayer, performed in the relative quiet of the chapel, provided a mental escape from the immediate physical discomfort, fostering a sense of inner peace or spiritual warmth. This psychological coping mechanism was invaluable in maintaining morale during extended periods of hardship and isolation. Furthermore, the communal aspect of religious worship provided a vital sense of solidarity. Gathered in the chapel, the entire castle community, from the king to the lowliest servant, participated in rituals that bound them together. Sharing hymns, prayers, and sacred meals, Eucharist, reinforced a collective identity and purpose. This shared belief system acted as a powerful social glue, essential for navigating the shared adversities of winter. Dr. Jonathan Harris, a scholar of medieval spirituality, notes, "In an era where daily life was often precarious, religion offered not just an explanation for suffering, but also a profound narrative of hope and a framework for communal resilience. It was an essential, invisible infrastructure for survival." Thus, even as the cold seeped into their bones and the wind howled outside their stone walls, kings and their courts found a different kind of warmth in their devotion. This divine warmth was not measured in degrees Fahrenheit, but in the strength of spirit, the hope for spring, and the unwavering belief in a benevolent power that sustained them through the darkest, coldest months. It was a profound reminder that human ingenuity against the cold was not solely physical or architectural, but deeply intertwined with the spiritual and psychological resilience of an entire society. Beyond the physical hardships and survival strategies, medieval winter in a castle exerted a profound influence on the intellectual and emotional landscape of its inhabitants. For the king, in particular, the long, enclosed months offered a unique, if often isolated, environment for reflection and contemplation. This was the mind's forge, where strategic thoughts, political machinations, and even personal anxieties were processed amidst the Arctic air. The reduced pace of winter life, dictated by impassable roads and curtailed campaigns, meant an increase in indoor time. For an active monarch, this could manifest as increased focus on administrative duties that required less travel, such as overseeing household accounts, hearing petitions, or drafting charters. Royal Chancery records show a significant uptick in written communications and domestic governance during the winter months, suggesting that the cold provided a period of administrative consolidation. This quieter period also allowed for more extensive reading, from religious texts and histories to strategic treatises, where available light and warmth permitted. The king's chamber, despite its chill, transformed into a space for intellectual engagement. However, the isolation could also breed introspection and, at times, melancholy. Extended periods within the same stone walls, with limited external engagement, might have amplified personal concerns and anxieties. Royal chronicles are not always explicit about the psychological states of monarchs during winter, but monastic records and personal letters often hint at periods of spiritual reflection, self-doubt, or even bouts of depression exacerbated by the pervasive gloom and cold. Dr. Mary Elizabeth Scott, a scholar of medieval psychology, notes, in an era where psychological well-being was profoundly linked to physical environment, the enduring cold and dimness of winter within enclosed castle walls would have presented a unique set of challenges to a king's mental state, potentially fostering deeper thought, but also amplifying existential concerns. Strategic planning, too, was a significant winter activity. While major campaigns paused, the subsequent year's military and diplomatic initiatives were often meticulously planned within the castle walls. Maps, though rudimentary by modern standards, intelligence reports, and discussions with trusted advisors would shape future actions, all against the backdrop of the crackling fire and the howling wind. This focused period for strategic conceptualization transformed the physical chill into a mental sharpening, turning the cold into a forge for future decisions. In essence, the medieval winter carved out a distinct season for thought, forcing kings into introspection and strategic planning, thereby shaping not only their immediate survival, but also the long-term trajectory of their reigns and kingdoms within the stark, cold embrace of their stone fortresses. The enforced confinement and stark environment of a castle in winter not only spurred strategic thought, but also profoundly shaped the inner landscapes of its inhabitants. For the king, particularly, this period of intensified isolation became a crucible for personal reflection, a time when the external world's chill mirrored a deeper internal quietude. With fewer distractions from travel, warfare, or extensive outdoor pursuits, the winter months provided an unparalleled opportunity for introspection. Medieval monarchs, despite their public roles, often guarded their private thoughts. However, the long evenings spent by a flickering fire, the pervasive dimness, and the sounds of the castle settling around them would naturally lend themselves to quiet contemplation. This period of reduced external stimuli would have fostered a different kind of mental activity, perhaps a deeper engagement with personal spirituality, a review of past decisions, or the formulation of future vows. Monastic accounts from the period frequently emphasize the spiritual benefits of winter's austerity, suggesting that this perception of quietude extended to the royal court as well. The emotional impact of this isolation, however, was a double-edged sword. While some found solace and clarity, others might have succumbed to melancholic tendencies. The stark monochrome landscape outside the castle, the limited social interactions for extended periods, and the physical discomfort of the cold could exacerbate feelings of loneliness or despondency. Without the constant movement and varied engagements of warmer months, the burdens of kingship, the weight of responsibility, the pressures of political intrigue, the anxiety over succession, would likely have felt more pronounced. Royal physicians' records, though not explicitly detailing modern psychological conditions, sometimes refer to vapors or bad humors more prevalent in winter, hinting at these struggles. Furthermore, the king's inner landscape would have been shaped by the knowledge that outside his formidable walls, his subjects endured even greater hardship. This awareness, coupled with the seasonal prayers for their welfare, could deepen his sense of duty, or, conversely, highlight his own relative comfort within the castle. The stark disparity between the peasants' purgatory and the royal chambers would have been an unavoidable reality, potentially fueling both compassion and a reinforced sense of hierarchical order. Ultimately, winter within the castle walls was a time when the mind truly became a forge, tempering the king's resolve and shaping his perspective. The cold, dark, and isolation created an environment ripe for profound reflection in isolation, an immersive psychological experience that was as much a part of how medieval kings slept through winter as the furs on their beds or the fires in their hearths. It was a period when the external rigor sharpened the internal landscape, demonstrating that the medieval winter was not just a season to be endured, but a powerful force that influenced the very thoughts and emotions of those who sought refuge within the enduring stone embraces of their fortresses. After months of enduring the oppressive chill, the pervasive smoke, and the subtle, constant battle for comfort within the castle's stone embrace, the arrival of spring marked a profound shift. This period, often signalled by the lengthening days and the first signs of thaw, heralded the leaving. A gradual but definite exodus from the winter confines, symbolising a renewal of life and activity. The transition from winter to spring was not immediate. It was a slow, anticipated unfolding. The first indicators were often subtle. A slightly less biting wind, a brighter, longer stretch of daylight piercing the narrow windows, or the softening of frozen ground. For the castle inhabitants, these signs were met with a palpable sense of relief and renewed energy. The heavy, layered winter clothing, while still necessary, felt less suffocating, and the constant demand for fuel wood began to lessen as temperatures rose, even marginally. As the weather improved, so too did the prospects for travel and external engagement. Roads, once impassable, would slowly become navigable again. This meant the resumption of trade, the arrival of long-awaited messengers and visitors, and the potential for a fresh influx of supplies. Royal itineraries often show a significant increase in travel and outdoor activities from late March or April onwards, as monarchs began to tour their realms, hold court in different locations, and oversee agricultural operations. This outward movement, a metaphorical leaving of the castle's winter-bound state, was vital for the effective governance of wider territories. Beyond the practicalities, spring brought a psychological release. The extended periods of confinement and introspection gave way to the promise of renewal. The dormant fields, once covered in snow, now held the potential for new crops. Livestock, carefully conserved through winter, could now graze freely. The vibrant colours of returning flora and fauna replaced the stark, muted tones of winter, offering visual and auditory stimulation after months of relative monochrome. For the king, the leaving of winter also meant a return to a more active, visible form of rule. Campaigns could be planned and executed, diplomacy could resume with greater ease of travel, and the ceremonial aspects of kingship could be performed outdoors or in more open, welcoming spaces. The energy within the castle shifted from one of endurance and preservation to one of enterprise and expansion. The end of winter was celebrated not just as a climatic change, but as a fundamental restart to the political, economic, and social life of the realm. It was a tangible testament to resilience, a hard-won victory over the elements, and an eagerly awaited dawn that breathed new life into the cold, ancient stones of the medieval castle. As the last vestiges of winter receded, leaving behind melting snow and nascent greenery, the castle's inhabitants, from the king to the humblest servant, emerged from their months-long struggle with a profound testament to their enduring spirit. The echoes of resilience, forged in the depths of winter's embrace, lingered not just in memory, but in the very fabric of medieval life and culture. The strategies employed to survive the medieval winter, the elaborate layering of clothes, the high-calorie diets, the meticulous management of fire and fuel, the psychological comforts of festivity and faith, were not merely transient responses. They became deeply embedded cultural practices, passed down through generations, shaping societal norms, architectural evolution, and even individual character. The value placed on warmth, thrift, and community during these harsh months continued to influence behavior long after the spring thaw. The experience of winter acted as a powerful annual reaffirmation of human interdependence and ingenuity. Archaeological evidence and historical records confirm that castles, far from being static structures, continuously adapted to the challenges of their environment. Innovations like improved fireplace designs, the widespread adoption of glazed windows, even if small, and better insulation techniques, such as wainscoting or more sophisticated wall tapestries, gradually emerged over centuries, driven partly by the persistent battle against the cold. These slow, incremental changes reflect a society constantly learning and improving its methods of thermal comfort. Ultimately, the king's sleep in medieval castles during harsh winters without modern heating was a complex tapestry woven from physical adaptation, social interaction, strategic planning, and psychological fortitude. It was an experience that transcends mere historical curiosity, offering a window into the profound ways in which environmental conditions shape human existence. It reminds us that comfort, once considered a luxury, was a hard-won victory, earned through ingenious effort in the face of nature's relentless power. The enduring legacy of this struggle is etched into the very stones of these ancient fortresses, in the design of their hearths, the placement of their chambers, and the tales of those who lived within their embrace. The seemingly simple question of how did kings sleep in medieval castles during harsh winters unfurled a narrative of resilience, innovation, and an unwavering human spirit, a narrative that continues to resonate through the centuries, offering profound insights into the challenges and triumphs of a world profoundly different from our own. It is a story of how humanity, even in the absence of modern technology, found ways to thrive, or at least survive, within the formidable, chilling beauty of the medieval castle.